Hey everyone, welcome to the 2:30 Stepping Outside Your Genre Comfort Zone panel. If you're not looking for that, then you're in the wrong place. But hopefully you'll stick around, even if you didn't mean to be here. We're going to be going through a lot of questions today. But if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. That's going to be at the bottom center of your screen there. You can enter questions in there, and then what we'll do is we'll make sure we have time at the end. I think this is going to be a great panel for interaction. So hopefully you do have questions. Feel free to chat with your fellow attendees and panelists in the regular chat. Try to keep those questions free, but if you have comments or whatever, or just want to have some banter, feel free to do that. Just ask that you remember this is family friendly, so let's be appropriate there. But I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself, and then I'm going to ask that we go around the room here and we'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll just jump right in. So my name's Ryan Van Loan. I'm an epic fantasy author. I have a trilogy out with Tor Books. My debut last year was called The Sin and the Steel. It's the story of Sambukina Bakalhura, who's like an autodidact street rat. She's also the first private investigator in her world, and her partner in crime solving Eld take on the gods and empires to upend their society. The sequel comes out in July. It's called The Justice and Revenge, and then the final book will come out next year. So that's it about me. I'm going to try to remain in the background moving forward, but if I have a thought, maybe I'll introduce it. But otherwise, let's hear from our panel, and let's start with John Wiswell.
Hi, I'm John Wiswell. I'm a disabled writer who lives where New York keeps all its trees. And I've been coming to Maryland ever since I was about 1 year old. And Baltimore is like a second home to me. So I'm very glad to have been able to participate in Balticon this weekend. I am predominantly a short fiction writer. I have worked in places like Uncanny Magazine, Nightmare Magazine, Cast of Wonders, Pseudopod, all sorts of places, and was recently nominated for a Hugo, Locus, and Nebula for my heartwarming little story about a haunted house that just wants someone to live in it. Open House on Haunted Hill. Happy to be here.
Thanks, John. Elora Malat, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Elora. I am one of the many techs and volunteers who helps make Balticon function in any way, shape, or form. I do some writing of myself. I posted a link into the chat of my fanfics. And hi, Flash, I see you. And yeah, this is my first Balticon. No, I'm a panelist. Also, apologies for Cat, because Cat.
No apologies for cats. They do what they want. Nino, Cipri, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Nino. I'm an author, most recently of two novellas called Fina and Defect. I've also written a short story collection called Homesick, and I've published essays and other short stories that aren't in that collection. I've written screenplays. I tend to fall into a couple of different genres. Right now I'm writing a YA horror novel. Fina and Defect are both, I would say, kind of like science fantasy, light science fiction. There's tech stuff in them, but I'm not a tech person and I don't really know how to research physics things, so it's science fiction-ish. And then Homesick just kind of bounces around a whole bunch of different genres. I also am nominated for a Nebula and Hugo and Locus and a Lambda award for Fina. I was yelled at for not mentioning that last night, so I think that's all I gotta say.
Awesome. Angela Yuriko Smith, do you want to go next?
Sure. I am the publisher. My name is Angela Yuriko Smith. I'm the publisher of Space and Time magazine, which has been around for a while. Probably you guys know it. We took it over from Gordon Linsner. Well, no, I'm sorry. We took it over from Hildy Silverman, who took it over from Gordon Linsner, who'd been running it since 1966. So that's been very cool. I also own Yuriko Publishing, and I've primarily write dark science fiction and horror and poetry. Love short fiction and poetry. That's pretty much about the attention span and time I have. Most recently, I have two stories in Black Cranes, which just won a Bram Stoker. And then I've got a story coming up called The Justice League and Give the Devil His Due, which is the Pixel Project's first charity, and all the money goes towards fighting violence against women. Then I've got a poem in Shadow Atlas. I feel like I'm just reading a laundry list here. Anyways, that's me. That's getting too long, sorry.
No, not at all. That's awesome. We clearly have a very talented panel group today, so that's always exciting. Okay, so I normally don't read the prompt, but I actually think this is a pretty good prompt. So I'll read that, and then I do have a first question. And Angela, I think we'll start with you. So just so you're prepared. So stepping outside your genre comfort zone, when you're interested in exploring other genres, it can be hard to figure out where to start. How do you find others who share your taste and will also expand your to be read pile with new authors? So I guess my first question for the group, but we'll start with Angela, is what types of genres do you currently read or write in? And what are some other genres you might have recently explored?
I'm typically a genre whore. I'll pretty much read anything that comes near me that has words on it. I tend not to read in whatever I'm writing in. So if I'm doing a lot of dark science fiction, I won't read dark science fiction other than, like, obviously for the magazine for submissions. I won't read in that genre for quite a while until I'm kind of moving on to a different genre. But I love science, anything sciencey. Where I get the crossovers is Google is fantastic for losing hours and hours and hours of time just randomly exploring everything. And so I'll get on there and I will start exploring one thing, and then that leads to another thing. And then all of a sudden I'm buying a book, and then, so that's what I do a lot of. And magazines. Magazines are fantastic. I mean, I might have a little bit of bias there, but magazines are fantastic. That's where I find most of my new favorite authors, because you read one story and then you go look up what the other stuff they have out is.
Cool, that's great. John, how about you?
I love to read wildly. I grew up with very few fantasy reading options. I didn't even hear the name Ursula K. Le Guin until I was like 25. It's just the cultural group I was in. I was one of the only people who was interested. So I didn't have anybody to point me. Instead, I had a very literary upbringing. So I was reading like a ton of Mark Twain, Washington Irving, John Steinbeck, all of whom I actually like profoundly, still like a lot of their works, but it was stifling. And I think when I came out of college, I started to develop just a crash course for how to catch up on all of this, we'll call it genre work. And trying to find what I liked in it was so incredibly hard. Because I left college and I went back home to where like nobody reads genre. So what am I supposed to do? And the godsend for me was awards. The benefit of awards is you get a ballot. And, if you don't like one book on a ballot, oh, well, it goes back to the library. But sometimes you get Joe Walton's Among Others or China Miéville's Embassy Town. And I was like, oh, all right. Okay, yeah, I want to write that. Or I want to engage in that. I want to be part of the tapestry of this. I want to, like, when alas, I picked Kelly Link up just off of a shelf. And I was like, oh, dude. Oh, yes. All right. Yes. Who is Ted Chiang? Like, this is wonderful. And it fills the heart in a way that's different than lit fic. And I continue to love lit fic. But I love speculative fic as well, and they're not exclusive whatsoever. I loved Marlon James's Brief History of Seven Killings before he wrote these fantasy novels, and his fantasy novels are also incredibly powerful. There's this recent thing where people are goofing on John Steinbeck for writing a werewolf novel.
I can't wait to read that.
Washington Irving wrote Rip Van Winkle, bro. Like, it's not like these are not mutually exclusive, and the attempt to compartmentalize things down like this is the pressure of capitalist marketing. It's not because people aren't actually interested in something a little bit more realistic or a little bit more imaginative. And so I find it all nourishing, and as such, it may not be any surprise, my short stories are all over the damn place. I like to write horror, I like to write humor, I like to write epic fantasy. The novel that I just finished is really freaking weird epic fantasy that would somewhere on the outskirts of Godzilla versus Kong and Mad Max Fury Road is like where that novel is.
I want this now. And Veruca Salt, and I'm saying, give it to me now.
I got one better, Nino. Shut up and take my money.
Anyway, that's where I come from. So I like this panel is right after my heart, because I had I tried to find ways into different niches the hard way by not having, like, the internet just wasn't as developed as it is now. So I'm very curious about the rest of you, though. I've gone on long enough.
Yeah, and I'm taking notes. I have follow-up questions, but this is all good
Ooh.
stuff. Laura, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the genre, like when, going in school, whatever I read was whatever, we had to read in English class and all. I've read, had to read fantasy, pretty much the gamut of genres and whatnot. And then pretty much outside of school, it took meeting people at Balticon who told me, and also meeting authors. Like I've met George R. R. Martin, I've met Brandon Sanderson, and came across the series Red Rising, which I've mentioned in a couple of the panels previously, because his book Red Rising just happened to have been sitting in one of the free books at Balticon 40. I'm like, this seems interesting. And then I've had friends recommend me Hunger Games and all that. Basically, if it sounds good enough for people to recommend it to me, I will read it. I've watched Stephen King films. I do like some horror, and I did post a link to my fanfics earlier in the chat. And I see the Red Rising marketing plan. Yes, it was very genius because I am a howler. But anyway, like, and basically a lot of my fan fiction is influenced by, like, if I'm like watching something or if I'm playing a certain game and all. And as you can see, my background is from Destiny 2, where it's Europa, hi kitty, and Jupiter is right behind my head. So, it's just pretty much, if it sounds interesting, sure, sign me up.
Cool. That's great. Nino, do you wanna give your take here?
Sure. Yeah, I've never had very strong allegiances to any one particular genre. I grew up devouring both like Babysitter's Club and Stephen King, kind of like in conjunction with each other. That's just sort of the kind of kid that I was. You could not like find a section of the library where I had not read something. And that's definitely persisted up into adulthood, where a lot of the times I judge book by covers and then I just pick them out, and that's what I end up reading. Plus, like, one of my favorite things to do for the longest time was just go into used bookstores and just like find whatever was in the dollar bin. So I ended up reading a lot and just very, very widely. I read a lot of poetry growing up. I was also reading things like screenplays, full ass novels, classic literature, what people call lit fic, even though I have some sort of like weird feelings about that phrase. And that kind of leaked into my writing when I first started publishing short stories. Like Kelly Link and Ursula K. Le Guin like were the kind of touchstones for me, and I think both of them really vary a lot in their genre. And I've always just like, I like different modes of storytelling. I get very bored if I feel like I'm constrained to one thing. So that's why, especially in my short fiction, I kind of hopped around a lot. I was writing secondary world fantasy, and I was writing horror, and I was writing, the kind of contemporary weird shit like Kelly Link was doing. With reading, the one genre that I have only gotten into like fairly recently, and I'm sort of embarrassed to admit that, is romance, where I was teaching a writing class and I was like, well, I want to do something about romance because I know I'm going to have some students that are interested in writing about romantic relationships. And so I gathered a bunch of suggestions, and then I was like, I've been missing out for the first 33 years of my life on a genre that I absolutely love. I'm a dumbass. Who knew? Everybody knew. So yeah. So most recently, like what got me out of my 2020 reading slump was romance, particularly KJ Charles, who's written a whole bunch of like queer historical romance and like some like fantastical romance, as well as a new novel called Honey Girl by, I want to say, Morgan Rogers, and if I've got that wrong, I'll be very embarrassed about it later, which is like this wonderful like queer coming of age story with like a very large kind of like romantic overplot, but she weds the like quarter life crisis narrative really, really well to the romantic narrative, and it's just so good. Cannot recommend that book enough.
We have a question in the Q&A I just noticed. First, Roberto said, please discuss cross-genre writing, mixing mystery and sci-fi or romance and horror.
Oh, so we're talking about like hybrids?
Like cross-genre, like
Yeah, I
Like-
think it's like a mashup. I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
probably like, primarily one, but with elements of another, and either reading or writing that you've done. Yeah, that's a great one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There was a season of the podcast Writing Excuses where they talked about elemental genre theory, and I don't remember who exactly came up with it, but that helped me kind of characterize like, oh, this is a really interesting and easy way to sort of think about different ways to mash up genres, like how to have romantic elements into like in your mystery, and like what that adds to a mystery story, or how to include a mystery narrative or a mystery plot in like secondary world fantasy, like how those two things affect each other, what they can add, and what comes out of like mooshing them together.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy that romance keeps coming up, because this is like my guilty secret.
No more guilt.
I did some romance. No, I typically, in horror, how you're always like, this genre is the best genre, that genre is not the best genre. But science fiction and horror go very close hand in hand. So we'd be sitting here in the horror panels over at, the StokerCon things, making fun of romance people. I'm so sorry. Yes, I did that. But, then it was, I think, NaNoWriMo, and I said, I'm going to do it again. Like, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with NaNoWriMo, but you know what? Why not? I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to do something I've never done before that's just completely ridiculous for me, and I'm going to write a romance. And I loved it. As I was getting in there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually kind of fun. I mean, at first it was a little weird because like nobody died. Nobody's dying. Still nobody's dying. It is about an incubus, and a witch conjures him. And so it's kind of like for a fun one night stand that he doesn't want to go away because he's actually really tired from his last job. So I guess it's not like, femme fatale and all that, but it was a lot of fun. And still I finished it and nobody died. It's so crazy. It's like so weird, but it was just like that opening yourself to a new genre. And now I've done 2 or 3 stories since then that were straight science fiction, like, horror, that on my normal genre. But in one of them, my daughter said, this is a romance, Mom. I mean, yes, there's a lot of death here. Somebody died. And, it's kind of horrific in some cases, but, these 2 people walking away together in the end to have a happy ending with a relationship is romance. And I was like, oh, what has happened to me? But I'm happy, and it's like we do get so kind of closeted in what we're supposed to be reading or writing, like what John said about reading that's what I grew up with too, is the Don Quixote and the Oliver Twist. And I don't know how many times I've read David Copperfield, but that affects whatever all the genres blend. And that's good. That's good. That's what makes them interesting, I think.
Yeah, totally. I really never understood the hate for romance. I mean, Papa Tolkien had Beren and Luthien, for example. So it's always been there in fantasy and science
Ignorance.
fiction. Yeah, I really have never understood it. So no guilt there at all.
I mean, I could explain the hatred for romance. It's misogyny.
Well, yeah.
It's the genre that you can punch down by hating. For me, cross genre writing or interstitial, or what we would call it, I usually look at it through the lens of some genres are genres of content and some genres are genres of effect. I don't know if this is something that came up on the podcast, but horror is not a genre of content. Psycho is a movie about somebody who's deranged. Nightmare on Elm Street is clearly a fantasy. He can come after you in your dreams. Alien is in space. You can have any kind of content so long as you have the effect on the audience. Whereas fantasy is a genre of content. You are obligated to have things in your story that the audience is supposed to believe do not exist in our regular reality, and we're visiting it. So it's very easy for a genre of tone or a genre of effect and a genre of content to occupy the same space. It's also very possible to have 2 genres of content that have complementary pieces coexist in the same story. So you can do a buddy comedy in space. In fact, please do. Everyone, please do. And that's how I generally approach it. And that's why, I've written more horror comedies than horrors, because I just can't stop making the tentacle monsters destroying Earth be funny. It's just so funny to me. Anyway.
No, that's a great point. Elora, did you want to weigh in?
Look, I think comedy horrors or horrorities are great. I would think that like for like a lot of the stories I grew up like if it's like a movie or a television movie that's been not turned into a novel, or a video game that's been turned into a novel, like it depends on like what the source material is, and then I think the written medium, you can also explore like other themes that you don't think about at first glance, but oh wait, they're there. It's just they're hidden. And I think Nino and I both have cats.
Yep. Genres are the cats are the genre that goes with everything. And they will step into your boundary.
And chihuahuas.
There you go. So before we move on, I did want to, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I know it's about other genres, but I am kind of curious because it seems like the panel has a pretty good mixture here of folks not necessarily growing up in the SFF horror space. You know, when you discovered SFF and horror, what was it about it that made you stick around, since, you know, you're at one of these conventions and all of you have done some writing in this space? And John, you're up on my screen, so let's go with you first.
All right. So horror, I had a different path with than science fiction. Horror, I got introduced to much earlier, and it was the first genre that didn't lie to me about my experience. It was not too sunny. It was, it wasn't just that like there's a werewolf that'll come after you, because that happens to us all. It is that the characters in horror were less softened. The hard edges that had been filed off for children's fiction were there, and it really struck me that like, oh wait, like teachers can be as vile as my teachers are. Like I ran into the ableism I experienced in real life. I'm disabled. I ran into the ableism I experienced in real life in horror before I saw it in other genres, or it being consciously depicted. In fact, one of the problems that I had getting into science fiction was that a lot of the canon had unobserved ableism inherent, baked in. That it's a tragedy, or that we use these disabilities to code the villains as bad guys, which actually held me out for a long time. Whereas horror was weirdly more egalitarian. I remember, this is not a book, but watching one of the early Friday the 13th, and a guy in a wheelchair got killed, and I went, yes, it's me. Like I could die here. I could be murdered.
That representation is just so important.
That's right. It gets you where you live, your forehead. That was a big thing for me. Then science fiction and fantasy, it was realizing like there are a few things like Tolkien I read early on, Stephen King I read early on, and then thought that like, you know, Stephen King and Terry Pratchett are it, and there's no other fantasy writers, which is like, that's a problem. And it really stifled me. And what grabbed me with Kelly Lincoln, Ted Chiang, and Joe Walton was they were leaping into the imagination with both feet and not leaving any of their humanity behind. So it wasn't the Smurfs, you know, it wasn't flattened. It was real, robust characters. And I mean, to this day, like I just finished Sarah Gailey's The Echo Wife, which is like, there's not 1 ounce of humanity left behind. It is all on that page. So that's what grabbed me, is we go into the imagination, but we don't leave any part of ourselves out.
Cool. Yeah, that's wonderful. Nino, how about you? I know you mentioned Stephen King early on, but was there a moment or something that caught you about this genre that made you want to write in it?
I mean, I was just going like, yeah, same while John was speaking, because yeah, I really got into speculative fiction through horror first. Like horror grabbed me early. And I think part of it was like fascination. Part of it, like John said, is just like, I actually like, this feels so much truer to my experiences than like whatever crap that they were trying to like give me at the kids library, like the Boxcar Children or something like that, where running away from home is just like, oh, this is fine and dandy. Nothing bad could happen here. And yeah, like through that attraction to kind of like harsher and weirder stories, I got from like horror into dystopian stories, then into science fiction, and then sort of through there into fantasy, which I felt sort of alienated by a lot of fantasy because I didn't really care for like the stuff that like people were trying to give to me, like ex-boyfriends who were trying to give me like Asimov, and I was just like, I don't know what to tell you, but I just don't like this. And then of course Lord of the Rings came out when I was like 16, and I was just like, oh, this is what people are into. I get it. It's about like relationships and characters facing overwhelming odds and, you know, going on these epic journeys, and also just a sense of wonder, and all of that stuff really, really did speak to me. Like, I think it was like kind of a turning point where I was just like, I want all of my fiction to hurt me versus like, actually, maybe it's okay if fiction is like nice to me, and like, you know, I can get that catharsis without going through hell first. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there. My cat keeps getting like on my lap and then off of my lap, and it's very distracting. So I'm just gonna go shoo him out of the room now.
No worries.
It's me.
Angela, how about you?
Yeah, I actually, the earliest things I can remember reading were nonfiction. I was just super into Ranger Rick magazine, like anything like the encyclopedias. I know that sounds so nerdy, but this is a good crowd to admit that. And just anything like that. And then it was somewhere around maybe second grade. I went to a Catholic private school, and in the library I found one of those old Alfred Hitchcock anthologies, and I read it. And so horror, again, that was kind of like my, I guess, gateway to fiction. It was just this amazing, particularly one story by Theodore Sturgeon, which I actually have the vintage copy right behind me because I hunted it down. But I remember reading it and just going, and I had grown up kind of thinking I am a monster because of these things that I think and everything. You know, I was the really ugly kid that didn't fit in, that, you know, my mother was Okinawan, so I ate seaweed. Oh my God, that's like practically like being the Kraken in second grade. And then I read this book, and the boy conjures, well, he makes friends with the shadows, and I was that creepy kid. And then the shadows take his mom, and I was like, God, yes, if I could have friends like that. But that story made it like it's okay for me to think these things. This is what horror fiction is. I think these things all the time. I want to get a shadow for you. I'm getting a shadow for you. I'm making my shadow list. But that was kind of like where I could accept myself in that. And so you'll see a lot of my work does have sympathy for the monster. And that was from that experience of otherness, of like, I don't fit in, I am the monster, but it's okay to be the monster, because honestly, we all are the monsters. And then from there, science fiction came in. I think it was the Dragon Riders of Pern. Well, I mean, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I mean, should we even count that? That was like they're from breath, like you are born and there's the Hobbit. But I remember specifically the Dragon Riders of Pern being kind of like a, wow, you know, there's this whole universe. Fiction could go anywhere. It doesn't have to be in my closet or under my bed, or you could really do anything. And so that was kind of it. And comic books were a big thing. There is a Grant Morrison character. This is probably why I decided to become a writer in like second grade. And he is called the Writer. He's kind of a villain, and he literally walks around with a computer strapped to his chest, but I don't think that's what it's called I don't think that was a concept necessarily back then. And he types out what's going on, and that's how he dies, literally from writer's block, because there's a monster coming at him and he can't figure out how to, like, you know, he freezes up and he can't write the ending to that, and he just dies. And reading that, I remember going, yeah, you could write anything. Like, you could literally create whatever you want. I want to have that power. So, and I actually just hunted that down. That's behind me too. I just realized, oh yeah, that came in the mail yesterday. I really had to look for that.
That's awesome. Elora, was there something that grabbed you early on that pulled you into this genre?
Growing up, I remember reading Reader's Digest, and they have like the little snippets of the like bits of stories in there. And then I learned about Stephen King because I grew up watching horror movies as a kid. John Carpenter's The Thing, which still scars me to this day. But pretty much like, you know, like pretty much growing up, yes, hi Kitty. I still have a kitty. But pretty much, growing up, because I've read the Will novelization, I've read a couple books of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers were that were novelized too. And basically, it wasn't until I was a freshman in high school, Lord of the Rings came out, and that what sparked my interest into the fantasy genre, and the science fiction stuff. I read bits of it, but that was from like English class growing up too. And it's just, and then I didn't get into like fantasy heavy until Balticon, when I was a volunteer at Balticon 48 and Brandon Sanderson was a guest of honor, and everyone got The Way of Kings, and I just dove right into that book. And I got into science fiction heavy because of Red Rising, and I dove right into that book too. And it's just like, give me all the books. And my first fantasy exposure was honestly Harry Potter. But I think a lot of us growing up, that was our first taste into fantasy growing up, really, all things considering. And it just seemed like it was like a little escape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, what I love is hearing all the different entry points, and that's why I love science fiction and fantasy and horror so much. And I think, especially, growing up, that's where I find everybody starts to relate to it, or like later on in life realizing, oh, wait a minute. So that's really cool. I know we're a little bit past the midway point here. I did want to talk about how do readers, or how did you find different genres to read in? So if you love one genre, how do you find another one? Do you have any tips or tricks? And maybe we can go around the room and talk about that a little bit. And Elora, let's just start with you since you're right here.
Honestly, being friends with writers is a great thing. It really is, because I've met Peter Prolitz, I've met Michael Ventrella, and because I met Peter at a Balticon, I got into reading his Shards Universe series, and it's just, oh, this is great. But basically, being friends with writers is a surefire way of getting into new things.
I think that's definitely true in my Nino, how about you? Any tips or tricks?
I tend to look, John mentioned ballots. Those are really easy places to start. Library, like build outs as well. It's been really interesting, especially on social media, to see the ways that like monthly periods, like, or where like, like in April and May, like, all of the books by like AAPI authors were lifted up. And that was a really interesting thing to just see, like a whole like host of different genres of books. In June, of course, it's Pride Month. So like everybody wants to kind of like build up a lot of authors, or build up a lot of lists with like trans and queer authors. And sometimes those books just have like very little actually connecting them beyond like a writer's identity. Mm-hmm. But it's still just been very interesting to like scroll through all of these lists and just like look at synopses, look at covers, look at comments from various like people on social media, and just see like what catches your eye. The biggest thing too for me was just being willing to also ask for recommendations from friends, from other writers, from readers, from booksellers, just being like, yeah, I'm in the mood for this weird thing. What can you give me?
Awesome, that's great. John, how about you?
An easy way to sample a new niche or a new subgenre is short fiction. You will get through those stories faster, and there are many magazines that either will give you inexpensive digital copies or will actually put their catalogs online for free. So there's very little monetary investment. Those were lifesavers for me because I didn't bring up another barrier to getting into science fiction and fantasy is I was broke and I couldn't travel to conventions, and I just didn't have a lot of capitalist access. Now there is more free fiction available than ever. Sometimes you could sign up for even book lists. Tor.com has a mailing list where every month they'll give you one of their novellas or novels for free. that is a no cost barrier to entry to sample a different kind of writer and a different kind of story. If you want to try sword and sorcery, far-flung stuff, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, I think, puts everything from their magazine on their website for free. If you want to try pointier queer science fiction, like Strange Horizons is probably gonna at least try to help you out. If you want horror, like the whole Escape Artist Network of Podcastle, which is fantasy stories, Escape Pod, which is science fiction stories, Cast of Wonder, which is speculative fiction for young adults or young adult fiction, and Pseudopod is horror. And not only do they put the full text of every story online for free, but they'll give you a narrated version for free. And all of these, they can fit into your commute, and they're a great way to dabble. And if you wind up not liking most of the stories, but liking one of the authors, probably they have a Twitter, probably they have a website. And then you can go in and see, like, okay, who do they get compared to? And Google their names and see what lists are they on, who do they get compared to, and see if those stories resonate with you too. You'll find out more, not just about the genre, but about the boundaries of your own tastes. And that's a wonderful gift to give yourself.
All right, John, it's a good thing we have this recorded, because we're just going to put that out there then. That's going to be the way that we talk about it from now on. It's going to be like one of those the more you know segments, but it's going to be
anytime I say anything and a rainbow flies across the screen, I've done a good job.
At the end, there's just going to be a voiceover that says the more you know. Angela, anything you want to add as far as tips or strategies for finding other genres?
Yeah, actually, I just had a stint where I went to the library and worked for like a year. I infiltrated. It's definitely worth it. But that was awesome because I came in super part-time, like 2 days a week, and learned a lot because they had so many classes. But I found out you can just go up to librarians. I'm a skulker at the library. I just skulk through and I go to different shelves and I grab my stuff and I leave and I never really talk to anybody. But there's people, as a librarian, I found out, that will come up and just ask you things like, hey, can you recommend some horror? And there's websites that they have dedicated completely to this. They take classes on this so that they can, well, what kind of horror are we talking about? Because there's so many kinds. There's, body horror, and there's, so they'll really narrow it down. I will say I was terrible at that because I tend to think in extremes. So I had somebody come up, young kid, I'm going to say young adult, and he asked me for, the scariest horror. And he didn't really mean the scariest horror. But I gave him Clive Barker, and he did not like that. That was not, I was told, what he wanted. He never accepted my recommendations again. But I was like, hey, it's really scary though. I'm just giving you a warning, right? Like, you really want to be scared? Like, you'll never sleep again scared? Like, listen to me. I'm not kidding. That's not hyperbole. So the library is excellent for that. And also a lot of these, I'm not even sure what you'd call them, like the episodic publishing models. I think Medium is one, but I've never really done Medium. There's Radish, and Amazon is coming up with Kindle Vella now. They're getting ready to release that. That's another place because there's so many writers and many professional writers. That's where that romance novel that I've got going on, because it doesn't really fit my things that I already have. So I'm doing it in Kindle Vella as an episodic thing. So somebody could come on and they can read the first 3 chapters for free. And then if they like it, it's kind of like pay as you read is how these things usually work. And then it's kind of a lot of stress on the writer to make sure you're being interesting and engaging, which we always should. But in that case, it's like if you drop the reader at chapter 8, you don't get paid anymore, where after they've bought your book, you didn't like it, sorry, Yeah. So that's another place where I've explored, like say Radish, when Radish was really going strong. It's just like it's sampling, you can just sit there on your phone, sample different writers and authors and, and new genres too, because there's a lot of different genres on there.
Definitely. I mean, I guess I'll just add 2 quick things. One is that, if you can find a book that has some content that you're already interested in, but maybe it's in a different genre, that could help out. So I'll give you an example. H is for Hawk is kind of literary fiction, almost literary nonfiction, but literary fiction. And I'm not really a lit fic person. However, I love hawks and I love falconry, and that is central to the theme in the book that's being expressed. So it was a great entry point for me. I really love that. The other thing I would say is, give yourself the freedom to put books down, but also give yourself the freedom to stick in there. So what I like to do is, decide 50 or 100 pages. I'm going to stick with it that long. If I don't like it at that point, that's okay. I'll donate to the library, I'll set it down, I'm going to go on to something else. But I think, sometimes people get locked into something. If you actively hate something, don't keep reading it. Reading is for entertainment and education, and you should be challenged at times, but something's just not for you, that's totally cool. Okay, so I saw that we did have a question. Have you ever, so this kind of gets into, I guess, plays on what I was just talking about. Have you ever had someone suggest a genre or a book that you disliked? Elora, how about you start us off?
The one book I clearly remember hating, and we had to read it for school for summer reading, was The Pearl. And it was awful. It was just, the ending left me very dissatisfied. And the other book whose ending was so hated by my college campus as a whole that there was a writing contest to rewrite it was Jodi Picoult's My Sister's Keeper. We had to read that because Cumberland County College, or the Rowan College of South Jersey, has one book, one college, and My Sister's Keeper was one of the books we had to read. It was the book we had to read, and we all hated the ending. Like, it just left such a bitter taste in my mouth that there was a contest ended up being held, and it's just, we all hate, okay, we agree, we hate the ending, rewrite the ending. So I did, and I ended up winning first place. I got a $100 gift card to Barnes and Noble, and my version that won is up on my Archive of Our Own link that I posted earlier in the chat.
Oh, I need to read that.
And to be fair, The Pearl, when I read it, by the way, since I just saw a comment, The Pearl, I was a freshman in I was in high school in sophomore year. None of us liked it. It really didn't. So, it's just, it was just, you'd have to pay me to reread The Pearl.
If I could just jump on, as a fan of Steinbeck, I have met the common denominator for most of the people who hate Steinbeck is they read The Pearl. So I'm just going to say, if you want to get people to read Steinbeck, don't start there.
Look, like I said, that was not my choice to read.
Yeah.
Pearl. I will give his other works a try, just not The Pearl again. Nope.
Yeah, why bother?
Yeah, I mean, I think as authors, it's great to hear that some people love something when other people don't, and vice versa, because then, like, when you get that 1-star review, you know that there's somebody out there that's going to be your 5-star as well. So I think that's totally fair. John, how about you? What's maybe one book that was wrecked to you, or that you tried in a different genre that maybe didn't quite work?
One of my first exposures to British literature was Shakespeare's Macbeth, which is one of the least pleasant reading experiences I've had in my entire life. And this poor, ignorant teacher insisted we spend a semester on it. And it's an entire high school classroom of hostile people who hate this book every week discussing another page of it. And you could not do Shakespeare more disservice than like, well, it doesn't seem like they're warming up to it. Well, then we will intensify the thing. We will make you, we're going to reread Macbeth this week then. Like that just, that was a terrible way of introducing the work. We were too young. We were not fluent enough in his dialect, and we were not taught well, which I think has taught me something about honing in on finding what literature will work for people. Because just because you think something belongs in a canon doesn't mean it belongs in everyone's hands, and it definitely doesn't belong in everyone's hands at every time. Mm-hmm. There are periods for things. So I mean, that I have now spent most of my life as somebody who just cannot stand Shakespeare, and I get to blame Mrs. Mialo, if you're out there. You did this. You did this. And then, I mean, oh God, there's science fiction stuff that I don't want to throw under the bus, but just look, I know you like Dune, but Frank Herbert doesn't know how human beings talk. Like, it's just, I could not listen to these fake people. And it's what made me think that science fiction was what lit fic people said it was. And I was poisoned because that's not the case. There were deeply human writers at that time, and it cost me, and not that they were entire contemporaries, but it cost me reading Octavia Butler younger. Like had that been, that would have been the right book for me. By the way, I mentioned that I hadn't read Ursula K. Le Guin's work, or hadn't even heard of her until I was 25. Wizard of Earthsea would have been one of my favorite books if it had been given to me when I was 11. It just was a missed opportunity. Just the wrong. Yeah. Anyway, sometimes the wrong books are put into people's hands, and you need to just check with people. What is it that interests you about this genre? Let me hone in a little bit more on what it is that appeals to you, so that I can find books that are more for you, that can help form those tastes. Anyway.
Okay, let's move on. Angela, do you want to go quickly, and then Nino, and then we're gonna wrap up with a final quick question. We're coming up on time, and this has been a great panel.
Oh, with the same question. Okay, so I was waiting for the next question already. Yeah, I don't want to sound like a hater, but it was the Harlequin romances. I had moved from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Sweetwater, Tennessee, which is like huge culture shock, and then to Washington, D.C., like in the space of 6 months. So, and in middle school. So, talk about like, wow, I have I have no idea who I even am. But in Sweetwater, Tennessee, the girls were all reading Harlequin romances. You know how you go through the little trends. So if you were anybody at all, you had a Harlequin romance on your books. And so I convinced my grandmother to get me a Harlequin romance because I want to look cool and fit in. It's not that easy, I found out. But I did read this book and also figured out why I didn't fit in, because that was like, I was like, oh, okay, I really feel like I just feasted on Twinkies or something. Like I just feel a little bit sick. I didn't get anything, and I am not hating on romance. So I asked her for a different one because I was like, obviously didn't like that. Second one was just the same. I was actually reading it, going, if I called her Cindy instead of Betty, this is like the same book. And that kind of killed that. And then that really colored my whole thing for romance ever after. That's one of the reasons I was a hater. Now I realize it is romance, but it's a genre of romance, a subgenre. So, and doesn't really reflect the whole genre. So I apologize to everybody who I've probably insulted over my lifetime.
We'll learn. It's okay. Nino, how about you?
I had a roommate just like give me the dirtiest look one time and just be like, how could you possibly call yourself a horror writer if you've never read H.P. Lovecraft?
Oh boy.
And I just sort of like looked at him, knowing that I had just had a horror story of mine reprinted in like the best like 2018 like best science fiction and fantasy of the year, or whatever speculative fiction of the year. And I was just sort of like looking at him, and I was just like, real fucking easily, I don't know what you want me to say here. Like,
oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I don't know if that really counts as like a recommendation, but I have read at least like 1 or 2 H.P. Lovecraft stories since then, and I feel very justified in the attitude that I gave him about it, because he was wrong. He was wrong.
Yeah.
And H.P. Lovecraft is also pretty shitty. I'll stand by that.
Yeah. Totally. Okay, so we're at 1 minute, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to plug ourselves here. So we're going to go around one book outside the genre that you would recommend. Don't say why, just list the name. John, let's start with you.
Stephen Fry's The Hippopotamus.
All right. Elora?
One book outside the genre. Come back to me. Let me think of a book.
Nino?
I will say Zayn Jokadar's 30 Names of Night.
Angela?
I'm going to say The Tao of Craft by Benabel Wynn. And I cheated. I looked behind me.
Elora, did you find one, or should we just...
I think the one that I still like even till this day is A Tale of Two Cities.
Okay, that's great. So we are at time. what I'd like to do is just go around, let folks know where you can be found if you have something coming out, if you have another panel. Elora, since we ended with you, let's start with you.
All right. Like I said earlier, I am one of the many techs and volunteers who helps make Balticon happen or make it function to where people still have a good time. I have another panel tomorrow, Future Utopia or Tacitly Terrifying. I have a Twitter, poison_stripes, archiveofourown.org/poison_stripes is where you can find my fanfics. You can also find where the rewrite of My Sister's Keeper is. That did win me first place. And I also, I'll be around Balticon.
Awesome. Angela?
Yep, you can find me at spaceandtime.net. And we actually have some flash fiction contests and championships coming up with that. And we do exquisite corpses all the time. So we like reader engagement, so that we can grow our community. And you can also find me at angelawysmith.com. And I have a panel coming up, self-publishing your novel, Critical Steps, at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then I have a reading where I'll be reading out of Black Cranes at 9. So that's really small type.
John?
You can find me at Wiswell, just my last name, on Twitter, and you can find me at johnwiswell.blogspot.com on the internet. I have a story in the most recent Fireside and in the next upcoming Fireside, and a story at Diabolical Plots. And I'm just going to put my information into the chat as well.
Awesome. Nino?
I have a reading actually tonight for Balticon at 7 p.m. I'm sorry to be competing with Angela's panel. That sucks.
No, that is the same time, huh? Okay.
You could just have two computers with two different Zoom screens going on at the same time and just split your brain in half, and it's going to be great. You can
and computer.
You can also find me online, ninocipri.com. I've got my books up there. You can find me most often on Twitter, screwing around and posting pictures of my cat. Literally, it's the last thing I posted. And that's just at Nino Cipri.
Awesome. Well, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Van Loan or ryanvanloan.com. Like I said, I have a book out now, The Sin and the Steel. It's kind of Pirates of the Caribbean meets Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes, but with a kick-ass female lead. And the sequel, The Justice and Revenge, drops in July 13th. And I'll be handing out on Discord. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Balticon. This has been a great conversation. Thank you all.
Thanks for the great moderating.
Thank you.
Thanks.